Welcome to a new episode of the China Flexpat podcast. Today we are talking about our topic, which is Flexpat careers in China. And we couldn't have a better guest than Miriam Wickertsheim, General Manager of Direct HR, a China-focused recruitment firm with more than a decade and a half of China experience. I have been following Miriam on LinkedIn for several years, and I really like her content about China and careers. And maybe you have seen her posts as well. Welcome, Miriam.
My name is Miriam Wickertsheim. I'm originally from Germany, and I've been living and working in China for a good decade and a half. I have always had quite a fascination about Asia in general. So I studied a double degree, economics and sinology, and came to Beijing when I was a student and really fell in love back in 2005 and 2006, fell in love with the country. So after I graduated from university, I decided to start my career over here. And that was 2008, and the rest is history.
And how did you get into this position that you're such a popular and famous recruiter in China?
My mom was a teacher in Germany, and my dad actually was a matchmaker. So keeping in mind, this was before all the apps, Tinder and whatnot. So you could see people business and connecting people and helping people grow once in our blood. So that's quite the overlap. And I had the opportunity to join my current company back in 2010, where I was first building up the Beijing and the North China operations of Direct HR. And then in 2013, I moved from Beijing to Shanghai to take responsibility for all of China commercial and strategic leadership. And very exciting, since end of last year, we're also expanding into Asia. So we are now also active in Thailand and Vietnam. I really enjoy the diversity that comes with servicing so many different clients. Our customers tend to come from what we call the nerdy and dirty industries. So manufacturing companies, a lot of high-tech related companies, everything industrial B2B. And one of the best things about my job is that I get to stand in a different factory every day and look at different products, different processes, and talk to different people and see how excited they are about what they're doing, and then helping their China journey and helping their China growth.
And today we want to learn from you, what are foreigners in China? How do they work, and what has happened to the foreign population recently? What does the job market look like, and what's the economic situation in China? That's a lot of questions. How would you start with this?
So it's quite a big topic to talk about foreigners in general, because there's always also a difference of education. There's a difference of where they're located in China. So, for example, the typical flexpat with a higher education, working in commercial companies, we tend to be located somewhere in the first tier or second tier cities most of the time. Whereas foreigners from developing countries, the large majority of them is in Yunnan province, and they tend to be in the smaller locations and also taking up different kinds of jobs.
These new foreigners coming into China, how do they differentiate from Chinese professionals?
This new kind of foreigner I was just talking about from developing countries, they are most similar to blue-collar workers. That means these kind of foreigners from developing countries, the ones I just mentioned, they tend to work a lot in agriculture or in very simple manufacturing. They would usually have a very low education. They would have a fairly low skill set, and you would find them in very high intense working situations, working for a quite low salary, under not necessarily the most ideal working conditions.
Interesting. So now we go back to talk about the Flexpat job that you just described. So if a foreigner wants to work as a GM in China for an international company, what are the job requirements, and how has this changed recently?
Yes, it has actually changed quite a lot. You know, I've been a recruiter for 15 years now, and we have very often placed foreign nationals, especially the typical flexpat, so a typical foreign national from a Western or developed country. And a typical profile would be a general manager or maybe a managing director of a larger sales office or a manufacturing company with somewhere between maybe 200 to 400 employees, usually in a technology-related or industry-related industry. And this is a very, very typical profile that we used to place and still place today. And the requirements have quite changed. So what we did in the past, the requirements have been around finding somebody who was called at that time, we would call him or her an old China hand. So somebody who's been in China a long time, who maybe came here as an engineer, sent from abroad and then just stayed longer. And as China was growing, as the company was growing, this individual also grew. Such a candidate would often not speak Chinese or just speak it on a very, very basic level. And such a candidate would often have as the highest education a bachelor degree, but come from an engineering related field. And these kind of candidates often were able to ask for quite high salary packages. And there's a new kind of profile, or there has been a shift happening most notably in the last, I would say, 1 or 2 years, which has seen such a foreigner or such a request from our clients, the foreigners, to be younger. So whereas in the past a foreigner who would be late 40s, early 50s was considered the perfect age, having maturity, having leadership skills, now we see there's a drive for foreigners who are somewhere between maybe 35 to 45, late 40s. So there's a clear distinction in the preference of the headquarter. We also see that Chinese language skills are becoming more and more important. If you look at the evolution, you could say back then it was nice to have, but absolutely not necessary. And then a couple of years ago, it became quite nice to have. Now it is strongly preferred. And in my personal opinion, in a couple of years, it will become mandatory. So this is in general one of the advices I would give to everybody. If you do have the time, please invest time to learn how to speak Chinese. And what we have also seen is a change of the compensation packages that foreigners can ask for.
If Flexpats try to get such a job, right, between 35 and late 40s and try to get a GM job, so how can they show their value? What can they do to find good jobs?
The Chinese labor force, the workforce, has matured significantly. Very objectively, there are not many jobs left which a foreign young man or young woman could do that a Chinese young man or young woman could not do. So we as Flexpats are differentiating ourselves less by hard skills and more by soft skills. So a lot of the advantages we bring are around building bridges to the headquarter, explaining China to the decision makers in the headquarter, trust, transparency, compliance, even though compliance is a touchy subject, compliance, these are really the advantages that foreigners still bring. But to be honest, when I speak to my clients, and my contact person is usually the CEO in the headquarter. So that will be the CEO, maybe the company owner somewhere in a Western country. And if we are speaking about a new China GM, a China MD position, and I will ask him or her, would you like a foreign national or would you like a Chinese national? They only have 3 criteria most of the time why they would hire a foreigner. And the first criteria is very, very simple and actually has nothing to do with the profile of the foreigner. It is just that somebody in the headquarter does not speak English well or may not be so comfortable in communicating in English in daily language. So then they say, oh, I would prefer somebody of my own country of origin or who speaks my native language as well. And this is by far the number one reason why foreigners are still hired, or at least why headquarters decide to hire foreigners. And this is also why you see a clustering. German companies hire Germans, French company hires French, Italian companies hire Italians. This is really due to language and culture. The second reason is the cost. And one additional reason which we've really seen coming into play in the last 2 years since the pandemic is that there's a wish to just do something different. To put that in relation, a lot of China business has reduced in terms of how much they contribute to the global business of a certain company. And so if a company previously had a foreign manager, they would tell me, oh, Miriam, this foreign manager, he or she has not reached their targets. We want to localize, we want to hire a Chinese national now because he or she will know the market better and local adaptation and all of that. And then if they had a Chinese manager before, then they will tell me, oh, Miriam, business is not going so well. We really feel somebody needs to communicate better with the headquarters. So let us search for a foreigner. So there's this really big, this maybe very human wish to say, we did A before, now let us try B. So these are some of the requirements why foreigners in the past have been hired. However, strategically, if a company decision maker, a company owner should decide who they hire, they should look at a list of criteria which is going into a lot more depth. So, for example, it should look into what market stage is their company in. Are they just coming into China? Do they have a rep office, a sales office, a small trading office? Do they just have a final assembly? And do they want to grow? Or it's already a mature market stage? So, for example, a foreign executive could be more useful when a company is just setting up, because then alignment also with the headquarters is more important. On the other hand, if deep market knowledge is required, if there's strong local competition, it may be of an advantage to hire a Chinese national. Other aspects could be regulatory complexity. The more complex it is, and also the more coordination is needed between China and stakeholders, maybe not only in the headquarters, but also in different countries. It could be a benefit to hire a foreigner. If it's mainly local, then it makes sense to hire a Chinese national. And really there are a lot of different criteria. A few others that come to mind would be the customer base. Is it an international customer base, or is the company really doing in China for China? Or are they expanding in the future into in China for Asia, or are they doing in China for global? So these are some of the requirements, and you can talk a lot more about the brand perception. Is it a brand that really wants to have a global perception, international credibility, where global expertise maybe also is valued, or is it more localized, how to build locally, how to build trust, how to understand the market. It can also relate, a lot of it relates to the headquarter. And I do have to say most of our customers are family-owned, small, medium companies where really the owners are often still involved in the business. And for such a setup, it can be a big advantage to have a foreign national, maybe somebody of the same cultural background, or if it's a Chinese, who understands the same cultural background. If you have a setup where China is fairly autonomous, you have low headquarter communication or contact, then it could make sense to hire a Chinese executive. So there are many, many different factors that come into play that companies should actually use to make an assessment whether they should hire a Flexpat or whether they should localize their China management team. At the same time, this is also true for Flexpats in their job search. That means it can be really helpful to use the same criteria and to say, okay, what kind of companies am I applying to? That means if, as a Flexpat, you would want to avoid applying to companies where it's really just in China for China, which have a very localized customer base and who are already very deep inside the value chain. Because then for those companies, it may be strategically smarter to hire a Chinese national. So if you're a Flexpat and you're looking for a new job, the criteria I just described identify those where you would add the most value. And I would recommend to direct your job search to these kind of companies.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. So you should find out where you can provide value and how and why this company is really looking for Flexpat and how you can provide the value that this company is looking for, correct?
Exactly. And also looking at the industry, looking at the, as we said, regulatory complexity. Who are their customers? How is the communication with the headquarter? all of these criteria, and all of that you should be able to find online. So that's not difficult information. That's not sensitive information to find out.
And what would you say, how have the salary packages changed in the last 10 years?
So the salary packages actually changed a lot, unfortunately not for the better. So I can give you an example of a typical, let's say, general manager salary package, a general manager MD of a small medium manufacturing company here in China who is a foreign national. And so traditionally such a person, such an employee would have a quite reasonable base salary. So somewhere between 1 million to 1.3 million gross, RMB, of course, gross as a base salary. And then on top of that, there would be some kind of variable component. So this could be bonus, this could be commission, management bonus. However, that would be structured usually based on targets or on KPIs. And those would be anywhere between 0 to 6 months on average. And then additionally, it used to be very common to have a nice company car, including a driver, which could be used for personal as well as for professional need. So you could also use it to have the driver drive your kids to school, or to drive your wife around, or your guests if you have visitors coming. Use it for personal needs as well. There would be, or it used to be very, very common to have additionally a housing allowance, which is not the housing fund that Chinese nationals get, but really for your rent. If you're renting a house, and that would be on the lower end around 20,000 renminbi a month, and then easily going up to 50,000 renminbi a month. And I think we all know and remember those expat families who lived in beautiful villas out in Qingpu or Shuni in Beijing. And it was additionally very common that a company would cover some of the school fees. And we have to remember that school fees, international school fees, are very, very expensive in China. And again, here on the lower end, that would be per child per year, on calendar year, on the lower end somewhere around 200,000 renminbi, on the higher end somewhere around 350,000 renminbi. And it used to be most of the time covered by companies against a 𝘧𝘧, of course, so that up to 3 children would be covered, and the company would pay for that. It used to be very common that the employee, as well as his or her immediate family, which means spouse and kids, would get on average 2 return flights to their home country. And I remember in recruiting, we often had then salary negotiations. Is the return flight, is it in economy or business class? That sometimes got quite heated, so both was possible. And then additional allowances, anywhere from restaurant allowance to dry cleaning allowance and so on. Total compensation for above 2 million renminbi all in would not be out of the ordinary at all 10 years ago. And now fast forward to today, this has indeed quite changed. Basically what's happening is that the companies are reducing the overall budget, and then they're giving more leeway to a candidate or to a future employee on how he or she wants to structure this. But a common structure nowadays is to have a quite reduced base salary. So, and this is the same candidate, right? So this is the same position I'm talking about. I'm comparing apples to apples. A salary range now would be anywhere between base salary, somewhere between 800,000 to maybe 1 million base salary. And on top of that, you would still have a bonus, or a commission or a variable component, still between 0 to 6 months. However, the KPIs, the targets, are getting more strict, or it's getting more difficult to reach those. Some companies still offer a company car, but they usually don't offer a driver anymore. Many companies do not offer a company car anymore, but then they would give a gasoline allowance. That means a candidate or an employee would use his or her own car and would get some renminbi per kilometer that they drive, and then maintenance fee and parking fee and whatnot reimbursed. And additional allowances would often be kept nowadays, so up to somewhere 20 to 30,000 renminbi gross a month. So really overall the salary packages have been reduced. Most notably and most important is that school fees are not covered anymore. Not as a general rule, but by and large, companies are not willing to cover school fees anymore. So what we are seeing is that if you talk to the schools, actually, they had quite a drop of international students in Shanghai, but also in other locations in China. And even though the current numbers have stabilized, there's not a big growth coming back into. So what has happened, for example, in the future is that I would introduce a flexpat who would have 3 kids, and the company is happy to interview him or her and would also employ him or her. And now having 3 kids, then my client wants to know how old are the kids and if they're in school age. They ask what school are they going to and so on. And then I had good candidates rejected just looking at the CV because they had more than 1 kid or more than 2 kids in school age. So a movement that we see at the moment is that a lot of flexpats who are here have a Chinese spouse. That means the children grow up at least bilingual, often trilingual, and then those children would go to local schools. And a lot of flexpats, they would try to buffer the significant cost for international schools. So that's definitely one of the big developments that we're seeing at the moment.
This means that flexpats with family, their cost is higher than their competition, which would be Chinese nationals for the same job, right? And then the company would have to justify the much higher package for a flexpat compared to a Chinese, and this justification could not make sense, right? So that they would say, no, we are not taking this candidate. We're taking a Chinese national who doesn't have all of this cost.
Exactly. And again, to be very clear, it is usually not so much the base salary and the variable, so the bonus or commission. It is usually everything that comes on top. And then here, as said, I think the German school, correct me if I'm wrong, is somewhere around 200,000 or so renminbi per year and per child. If you have 3 kids, that's 600K on top of your budget, on top of everything else. And this is really what's the differentiating factor. Why often foreigners or flexpats are still a little bit more expensive than Chinese nationals. This difference really becomes negligible when you go to senior executive positions. So a Chinese GM or Chinese MD would not necessarily be much cheaper than a foreign GM or foreign MD if you take out school costs and costs for very expensive housing.
So if flexpats figure out that they cannot stay in China because they cannot find a job with their family cost, so what can they do to proceed their career?
It's a tricky situation indeed at the moment. A lot of flexpats who are still here also have a Chinese spouse. So they have family obligations. The Chinese spouse may not want to leave China, may need to take care of their parents here in China who may be elderly. Maybe the kids are somewhere in the educational system, which is either not so easy to integrate into a different country, or they don't want to disrupt the child's development. So from a personal perspective, it is not always that easy. However, just strategically, what is advisable is to try and find a position here, if that's possible. We also see a lot of flexpats who are starting their own company, who are on their own entrepreneurial journey. And I think here it's important to keep in mind that even though the economy at the moment is recovering quite more slowly than we all had hoped for, sooner or later this will also improve. So we have had a drain of flexpats and foreign nationals, but at the same time, the reason that at the moment there are not so many job opportunities available is related to the economy. So once the economy improves, and this can be either overall or in your specific industry, then a lot of job opportunities are coming back. So that would be an option to stay in China. If, however, you say no, you don't want to stay in China, but you do have the China background, I would really warmly recommend to nurture that. There would be, in my opinion, 2 options. Option number 1 is to go back to your country of origin. That may be Germany or America or France or wherever you're from, and then make sure you work in your country of origin for a company that has business dealings with China, to really have this China storyline as a red line going through your whole work history. Because then when the economy picks up, whenever that may be, you can jump right back on the wagon. And then the experience you have gained back in your country of origin, but continuously working with China, will be an advantage that you have when you're looking for your next job afterwards. Option number 2, in my opinion, is to look at the Asia market. And here I would really recommend the developing countries. What is especially coming up is, of course, India. India is very hot, but also Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, and Malaysia. And then trying to work for a foreign company which is active in those countries, but working in those countries. So basically then you're combining the foreign company background, whatever country you're in, for example, Thailand or Indonesia or Malaysia, and also a China connection. So this company should have business dealings with China, for example, producing in China and then selling abroad or selling into China, because that really will give you a very valuable additional skill set, and it's just smart from a strategic point of view. Now, it may quite likely be that you will not get the same salaries that you had in China, especially that you might have had in the past in China when you go to one of these other countries. However, living expenses are cheaper, and also we are in the economic situation that we are in. And it is wise to strategically put you in a position that once the economy picks up, you can really ride on the wave, on the tidal wave that is improving, and you will have added so much valuable insight and information to your profile, adding to your strengths, as they say, that you can then make a career jump up to a higher level of position where then you have regional experience, for example.
Miriam, what is the risk if this trend continues and there are no foreign employees or managers in international companies in China?
In my opinion, it is a worrying trend that we're seeing at the moment, that several factors come together. On the one hand, we see that foreign companies are localizing the entire China management. On the other hand, we see that more and more flexpats are leaving the country to start working in a different country. We also see that even though in the recent or in the current year we've seen more business travelers from the headquarters coming to China on account of the 15-day free visa entrance, which is open to more and more countries. But overall, we don't see a lot of exchange happening between the headquarters and China. And so while I understand that at the moment the economic situation is not ideal for many companies, if you take a step back and you look at it from a strategic and a little bit longer term perspective, this is actually quite a big concern. A lot of the information that is traditionally coming out of China, be it statistics or other kind of official information, is also at the moment a little bit limited. So any kind of communication channel that we have and that we are cutting or that we are not purposefully nurturing as a Western company or organizations and a decision maker, that is not wise. In my humble opinion. The reason is very simple. Economy is not great right now. However, economy will recover at some point. It is very unlikely that if you're already in China or if you're a company expanding internationally or you already have expanded internationally, that you will be able to exist completely outside of China. You will either need to deal with China, maybe you're producing in China, maybe you want to sell in China, maybe you'll be in Asia, and you have to deal with China. And what we're seeing at the moment is a very, very worrisome trend of erosion of knowledge. And then now what happens 5 years in the future? Let's continue the current trend. There'll be less experienced flexpats in China who can explain China to the headquarter. The headquarter will not have been in China. Even at the moment, it's usually the CEO or whoever in headquarter is responsible for China, Asia Pacific, but it is already not the line below. So you already don't have the global production leader, you don't have the global finance leader, you don't have the global HR leader necessarily coming to China, even one. So there's a lot of knowledge that is already not at an ideal level. If you compare it, for example, to America, a lot more company decision makers are traveling to America, or there's just a lot more innate knowledge and understanding that Western organizations have of, for example, America. And this is a mistake in my opinion, and I could very well imagine that in a couple of years down the road, a lot of companies will be struggling to get this kind of updated information, get this kind of knowledge, and then instead of nurturing those connections already now, they will have to start from scratch.
Thank you so much, Miriam, for these personal insights into a very complex topic. But let's talk about you for now. What are you grateful for looking back on your international career?
I'm especially grateful for the timing of my career. When I first came to China, and this was in Beijing back in 2006, I was still a student. I graduated 2008. That was really the end of the golden year. I joined my company, I joined Direct HR in 2010, and we had almost a decade of really amazing growth and amazing business opportunities. I'm really grateful that I personally have been able to witness the development of China. To give you a reference, when I came to China, there was no social insurance. When I came to China, there was no animal protection. So I've really seen China grow and mature in so many aspects, even outside of work. And that really opened my heart. And I was able to see all the good things and the long way this country has come, not only the current economic situation.
This is really an amazing career that you were able to experience this development of China. But what's next in your international career?
As the next career target, I'm not leaving, of course, but we are currently also expanding into Asia. That means we already have a lot of projects in Thailand as well as in Vietnam. From a strategic point of view, we may consider expanding further. We are basically choosing to join together with our existing clients. So all those small, medium, often family-owned manufacturing or high-tech companies who are already in China, either with a sales office or a manufacturing site, who are now also expanding in their diversification strategy into Asia, and we're joining those companies. Whereas in China, we work on mid-level management and up position. To give you a reference, in China, we work on a minimum salary of 500,000 renminbi per year. And then in the other Asian countries, we really focus on key decision makers and country heads. I'm personally very excited. I think this is one of the new chapters of China's market development. I'm excited to go between China and Asia. I'm excited to see how this is all playing out, and I'm excited about the lot of synergies and growth opportunities we can tap into.
Who should listen to this episode, and what's your message?
I think this message can be helpful to all the flexpats currently in China. It can be helpful to the flexpats who had to leave for one reason or another China during the last recent years and are looking to come back to China. I think this message can also be quite helpful for company owners in the developed countries who are re-evaluating especially their HR strategy in China, and then also thinking about the next steps.
And this is the purpose of the China Flexpat podcast, to give both companies and talents, flexpats, more insights into how to build a career in China, how to work in China, how to invest in China. And we are really grateful to your insights today. And I hope that everybody can reach out to you on LinkedIn, follow your great content, and contribute more and more to how we can work together between the West and China. Thank you very much, Miriam. 谢谢 and 再见.